Let's talk about one of the protocols we'll be using together, Brainspotting. Brainspotting is a powerful tool for healing trauma. This video is a very brief background on Brainspotting with practical ideas for how we use Brainspotting in trauma healing. Brainspotting was discovered and developed by David Gran, who's a therapist in New York City. He was originally a trainer for EMDR. He also developed some variations on the standard EMDR protocol for his private practice. It was while he was practicing one of these variations that he literally stumbled onto Brainspotting. The motto for Brainspotting is where you look affects how you feel. Graham believes this to be true for both positive and negative emotions. There's enough research from brain science to suggest that a brain spot connects your eye gaze to a neurological location or networks in the brain. When it comes to trauma, the brain spot connects to an unprocessed area of trauma that's at a deeper level below our cognitive or the thinking brain. Activating this spot through eye gaze allows us to have this information surface first as body sensations that can create tension in multiple body locations. It also brings up the sensory parts of the trauma, and it points out the locked up action tendency or urges from that moment. Brainspotting is really more of a body-based experience than thoughts and feelings. Remaining fixed on this spot for several minutes allows the locked up sensations and urges to gradually be released. This continues until there's no longer any tension, or the tension has gone down enough to be more easily tolerated. This always seems to go hand in hand with noticing and releasing the urges and action tendencies that are connected with the traumatic event. Throughout the releasing process, a therapist follows and encourages what's happening to help the client create a balanced and safe environment. This is important for stepping into these memories rather than avoiding them or pushing them down. Lots of times, therapists say very little during processing. Sometimes, I'll observe and point out body reactions. Other times, I'll give words of encouragement and reminders to breathe through the sensations. This is also helpful in staying grounded and in the present moment. There are lots of ways to find a brain spot. We'll be focusing on just a few of them, as that should be enough for us to get things started. First, we need to clarify a few important terms. The first one is SUDS. This stands for Subjective Units of Disturbance or Distress. SUDS are a way to measure how much a memory bothers you in terms of emotional and physical distress. It's usually a number somewhere between 1 and 10 that we can measure when we begin processing, and then again throughout the process and especially at the end. This term is common in many trauma protocols, including EMDR. Another term that we use is called activation. Activation is a way to notice some changes that are happening internally as a result of landing on a brain spot. Sometimes, the activation is very slight and hard to notice. Other times, the activation is noticeable in body reactions as well as in emotions and urges to take action. Activation is usually a sign that some type of processing is already happening. This can be easier for clients to identify if they don't necessarily think that their activation is disturbing. Activation is the term mostly applied in Brainspotting. The last term we need right now is bilateral stimulation, or BLS for short. BLS is basically how we engage both sides of the brain while working through trauma. Remember, each side of our brain holds important information to heal from trauma, and we need to find ways to have both sides working together. This is critical, and we will likely spend some time together finding the best types of bilateral stimulation for you. Sometimes, bilateral stimulation is achieved through using headphones, where the music travels from one ear to the other while it's playing. Another way to get bilateral stimulation to happen is to use a device that's called a TAC audio. And these create buzzes in your hand using tappers. And it moves from right to left hand. One of my favorites has always been tapping clients' hands. This is especially true with kids. It's great to teach them how to do this and then turn it over and let them be in charge of the entire process. When it comes to brain spotting, we will be using the bilateral stimulation before we start finding your brain spot. Then we'll transition to looking for what the brain spot might be. The first type of brain spot we will likely try is called the outside window. It's called the outside window because the therapist finds the spot by observing what's happening on the outside of the client while the client slowly follows a pointer. When the therapist is able to notice different facial or body reactions, the pointer rests in that position and the processing begins. When we're using a pointer, generally we will start right in the middle with a pointer that looks something like this, and then we will slowly move to your right, to your left. Lots of times, in order to make it easier and maybe to lighten things up just a little bit, I will use a little stuffed animal or a finger puppet. This makes it a little bit easier, especially for kids to see, and also just lightens the mood a little bit. The benefit of the outside window is for clients who struggle with noticing any activation. If their bodies aren't reacting when they begin brain spotting, this is usually the result of years of avoidance or possibly dissociation. Many clients have learned how to shut down these emotions and the sensations that are too disturbing. The outside window allows the therapist to notice the activation and rest in that spot to allow the processing to begin. The downside to this is that sometimes it can be hard to find an activation spot, mostly because several may be noticed during the initial scan. The other downside is that an outside spot is not quite as precise as the ones we'll find on the inside window. The inside window is when a client can notice the activation and let you know what point is at the strongest. When this happens, it's usually surprising for clients, really no matter how many times I've done brain spotting. After finding the spot moving from side to side, on an inside window, the therapist then checks to see if there's any additional activation that may be happening just by moving the pointer up or moving it down on that exact same spot. Once this spot is established, the therapist encourages the client to allow as much activation as possible to occur. Both windows are processed until activation and disturbance reduces as much as possible. Sometimes this is down to a 0 and no activation remains. Other times, we take it as low as it will go using brain spotting. These two windows are really the primary brain spots we'll work with for resolving trauma in relatively straightforward and less complex trauma situations. Sometimes, the impact of long-term trauma has created such a strong and overwhelming sensation for the clients that they often shut down or overreact when working through the different trauma experiences. It's important to remember that lots of these trauma memories have been suppressed for years. In these cases, we can run the risk of not having enough activation or too much activation to make processing effective. Sometimes, dissociation has become an automatic reaction to thinking about trauma experiences. In these cases, we need to have a way to gradually enter into the trauma until it's more tolerable before we can transition to either the inside or the outside window. In these situations, we'll start with a resource or grounding spot. I believe this is one of the most valuable aspects of brain spotting when it comes to healing complex trauma, and it's really the primary reasons why I use it as an entry point for addressing trauma with my clients. There are two ways I've used resource brain spots in my work with clients. The first is the standard protocol used in brain spotting. In brain spotting, we can start with thinking about the trauma we want to process in general terms without a lot of detail. Holding this general idea in mind, we look for any spots in your body where you might experience a small sense of being calm or feeling grounded. Once you notice that feeling, we amplify or increase that positive sensation by finding a brain spot that seems to connect to those positive feelings. As we increase this positive sense of being grounded, we can then begin considering more details of the trauma in small pieces. As the trauma is experienced and the sense of disturbance realized, we hold it for maybe 10 or 15 seconds. Then we'll transition back to the resource brain spot and allow the positive sensations to return. This moving back and forth is called pendulating, and it allows clients to increase the amount of time focused on the disturbing memory until they can reach a point of being able to stay grounded enough to transition to just using outside or inside window. Processing then continues as though you begin with one of those two windows. Another great application for resource brain spotting is to identify the ways you would like to see yourself handling difficult situations in life. We can take this preferred way of believing and find times in your life when just a little bit of this has been happening and is true for you. We then search for this brain spot and amplify those feelings and that memory as well. This is a great way to be introduced to brain spotting early in therapy. For instance, one of the exercises we'll do early on in therapy is a description exercise of how you want to see yourself moving forward in life. Let's take a common one to better illustrate how this can look. Let's use joyful as one idea. Think back on a time when you were able to experience a great sense of joy. Maybe it's a wedding, or a birth, or a sporting event, or any time that you can remember that you felt joyful. Now, think about all the details of that event, like what you can see and hear and smell and taste and even feel about the event. Now, hold all those details together with the feelings and tap your shoulders on either side to create your own bilateral stimulation. Notice how these feelings can get stronger as you put all of these ideas together. You can do this by yourself using bilateral stimulation. Together, we can use bilateral stimulation and identify the brain spot where that feeling becomes even stronger and just stay there and amplify those feelings. Once these elements are in place, along with the bilateral stimulation, we can use the feelings and connect them to a brain spot. This increases the positive sensations even more. As we work together, we will also connect to a cue word to these sensations. Eventually, if you practice this enough time over the course of a few weeks, the cue word will almost instantly bring the same positive sensations and feelings. All of these ideas that go along with brain spotting can have major benefits for trauma survivors. As we work together, we'll find the best ways to apply this powerful tool to your situation for the greatest potential for healing. As we finish with brain spotting and trauma, we'll usually transition to using EMDR. One of the things that I love about David Grann's idea with brain spotting is he fully believes that it's designed to be integrated with other types of therapies and protocols. Let's move on to taking a look at the EMDR video so you can better understand how this transition can happen.